Charlaine Harris's vampires are really unusual in the classic vampire literature, in being communal beings, in finding more than one at once, and finding any that want to fit into society, which is certainly not something Stoker could have imagined.
She is successfully bringing the vampires out of the closet and letting us see how, oh, they're our neighbors, or oh, that's him at the bar. She's really urbanizing vampires and letting them coexist with us.
I'm using the vampire community as a metaphor for larger things.
A lot of Americans don't think you people deserve special rights.
They have the same rights you have.
And there's a reason things are the way they are.
Yeah. It's called injustice.
Read it on one level as a good adventure and a romance. Read it on another level as me trying to put in my own 2 cents.
In the same breath as we would talk about civil rights movements, now we're talking about vampire rights movement. It's a brilliant twist.
Oh, don't worry about Sam. He's cool. I know for a fact he supports the vampire rights movement.
How progressive of him.
It's so entertaining, and at the same time, it's really smart. You really lose yourself in this world.
The moment you say the word vampire, people immediately have this vision in their head of what the vampires in the past have been. And this is nothing like that.
It's not some kind of paranormal, spooky sci-fi thing. It's that vampires are a legitimate section of society. They've come out of the coffin.
Apparently there's this vampire bar.
Fantasia.
Fantasia?
Vampires are real, and they live among us. And they're all just trying to get along.
Won't you come on in?
Into the house?
This is a world in which vampires are more or less legal citizens of the United States. They're out and about, they're part of daily life, they pay taxes, but there are lots of rights that are still denied the vampire population.
We're citizens, we pay taxes, we deserve basic civil rights just like everyone else.
The Bela Lugosi, the Dracula movie, I think when Van Helsing says something about the greatest thing about the vampires for them is that people don't believe that they exist. And that obviously all changed when they came out of the coffin, and they're not all happy about that.
We have to moderate our behavior now that we are out in the open.
Not everybody thinks it was such a great idea.
It's taking this fearful creature and bringing it into our community, as it were. That's what this story does.
Had Miss Stackhouse seemed to feel about a vampire being in her house, interested in her granddaughter.
She seemed like she was in seventh heaven.
Since Stoker wrote about Count Dracula stalking Mina, we've been thinking about the possibilities of romantic and sexual encounters between vampires and humans. We've developed this to the point now where it's almost a given that the two are going to get it on in one fashion or another.
The original Dracula was written in Victorian times, and it was, maybe a metaphor for, the women of the time who, wore chastity belts and had collars buttoned up to here, and Dracula kind of changed all that. He ripped open the blouses, bit them on the bosom and on the neck.
In the world that Charlaine has created, being bitten by a vampire can be a highly erotic experience.
Vampires find humans intensely attractive, of course, because humans all have blood. And the most pleasurable way to take that is during sex.
There's obviously the sexual metaphor of insertion with the piercing of the skin.
It's a metaphor that really bludgeons you over the head. So the vampire has his fangs, and the vampire sees a potential victim that he finds attractive, and the fangs grow long and hard. And he penetrates her at the neck, of course, and there's a fluid exchange. It becomes this very blatant and obvious metaphor for sex.
If sex is physically connecting with someone as much as most people ever will, then breaking the next sort of barrier, breaking the skin and sharing blood, and that's just another, it's kind of out there, but I would guess.
This sort of tall, dark, and handsome vampire who comes and sweeps you off your feet and has special powers.
Love all you like. I think he's fascinating.
The Wolfman and Frankenstein and a lot of the famous monsters in film are really creatures of horror. Vampires are very sexy.
The idea of being seduced by a vampire on the way to being bitten has a very erotic quality, which I think is Maybe it's just appealing to me. I don't know.
To bare your neck to your vampire lover is to symbolically give yourself over to that person's power.
There's something about having a creature that thrives on the very essence of life, that is blood, and takes that blood by embracing a victim, that is just naturally seen and experienced as sexual.
Where the blood is taken, there's a weakness that comes with that is a high in some respects, whilst also sexually reaching orgasm. I can't believe we're talking like this.
If we want to talk about what is climax for a vampire, what is the ultimate vampire orgasm, is the drinking of the vampire's blood by the victim.
Christianity absolutely influenced the Western conception of the vampire. And one of the easiest ways to see that is just to see all the imagery that Bram Stoker uses of blood drinking and the communion-like imagery.
The vampire is in many ways kind of a dark side of Christianity, that communion is outside of the realm of God, and yet now you have immortality from the drinking of blood, only it's from the vampire's blood, not from the blood of Christ.
As the Balkan region of the world became Christianized around the 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries, the story of the vampire is also developing, and they share certain very distinct parallels. Most notably, the idea of the taking of the Eucharist on the religious Christian side and the drinking of blood on the vampire myth side.
There was a book that I read as a teenager called They Thirst that really interested me because as it dealt with the mythology around how do you kill a vampire, it had something I'd never seen before, and that was that holy water was not just water from a church which has been blessed by a priest, but that holy water was also seawater because it was water that God made. And that was the first time as a young reader that I was really aware of how flexible were some of the mythologies around vampires.
Our guest of honor is a vampire. What do you think's going to happen when he comes out and sees a giant cross?
I don't know. Crucifix only has an effect on the vampire who came from some kind of Christian background or some kind of religious background where the crucifix meant something.
The original Dracula, Vlad Tepes Dracula, tells us of a story that as he was out on one of his crusades fighting for the preservation of Christianity, his beloved wife, Elisabetta, is told that he's been killed.
Now they lied, because they hadn't killed him. He wasn't dead. She committed suicide. She jumped out that window and threw herself into the Argus River.
When Dracula returns, he is infuriated, obviously, that this has happened and greatly saddened and asks for Elisabetta's burial. The priests in the area refuse to bury her because she's a suicide and therefore is not worthy of Christian burial. Dracula, at this point, renounces the cross, and as a result, the vampire becomes repelled by the cross.
I don't think Jesus would mind if somebody was a vampire.
I don't either, honey.
In the literature of L.A. Banks, a contemporary author writing on vampires, her vampire fighting teams are people of true faith of all religious traditions. So she's got vampire hunters who are Christians, who are Jews, who are Muslims, who are Hindu, who are native spiritualists. And the issue is, do they have integrity of heart and are they faithful to their tradition? Not do they have the right religion.
I wanted to, take the vampire story beyond the traditional Christian, you hold up the cross and the vampire shrinks back. I wanted to put it in the realm of respect for every person who believes in something good.
The vampire tale is inherently religious because it deals with the beginnings and ends of life. That's the time when religion is very prominent for us because religion answers the unanswerable questions about birth and death and the afterlife.
If we didn't have Christianity, we would still have vampires, but they would look and act very, very different.
Aren't you afraid to be out here alone with a hungry vampire?
They're supposed to be evil. What's the purpose of being a vampire? You the devil child!
Vampires of folklore really embody the fears that the living hold for the dead.
That need to answer our own fear of the unknown is what propels the vampire on and keeps the myth developing.
How attractive is it to have powers that humans only dream about?
I would like to live forever because I just don't want to miss anything.
You don't want to hang out with Frankenstein, but when it comes to Dracula, hey, you'll spend a few hours with him.
Oh!